Good morning. Hi, I'm Greg Morstead. I'm the Dean and Vice Provost here at Cornell Tech, and it's my pleasure and my honor to wonder about the AV here. Good. We're getting set up here. Apologies. There we go. Okay, that's so that folks online can see us. Apparently, we have a lot of people online. So, but for those of you here in person, welcome to our campus. It's delightful to have you here. Valuable moment for his leadership at Cornell Brooks and this event here today. It's also my distinct privilege to welcome Congressman Ted Lieu. Congressman Lieu represents the 36th District west of LA. He serves on the House Judiciary Committee, Foreign Affairs, and the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. He studied computer science at Stanford. Okay, earned his law degree from Georgetown, and was a colonel in the Air Force. He's one of the few naturalized citizens serving in the House and immigrated to the U.S. from Taiwan in 1972. It's my understanding that Congressman Lieu is one of only 4 members of the House with a computer science degree, and that distinction, together with his extraordinary background and experience, uniquely qualifies him for this discussion today. Thank you, Congressman Lieu, for joining us. I'd also like to acknowledge one other elected official with us here today. Like Congressman Lieu, Alex Porras got his start in the State Assembly, where he currently represents the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Alex is a Cornell grad, yay Cornell, and earned his master's degree in computer science at Georgia Tech. And he has deep ties here to Cornell Tech, literally putting us on the map. I can tell you about that some other time. Thank you, Alex, for joining us. All right, so Steve Israel and Congressman Lieu will kick off the program with a congressional briefing on AI and social media. That's going to be followed by a discussion on AI, misinformation, and the threat to democracy led by 2 members of the Cornell faculty. Doug Kreiner is the Clinton Rossiter Professor in American Institutions at the Department of Government in Cornell's College of Arts and Sciences. Professor Kreiner is a prolific and celebrated author about politics, the presidency, and public opinion. Joining him will be our own Helen Niesenbaum, the Andrew and Ann Tisch Professor of Information Science here at Cornell Tech, and the Director of the Digital Life Initiative, or DLI as we call it. DLI is a program where Helen and her team explore societal perspectives surrounding the development and application of digital technology, focusing on ethics, policy, politics, and quality of life. Thank you so much, Professors Kreiner and Niesenbaum. And for our guests here in person, and for those of you joining remotely, you're about to hear from some of the foremost experts on AI, technology, and politics. This is an extraordinary program, and we are delighted to host you here at Cornell Tech. Thank you so much, and now I will turn the podium over to Steve Israel.
Dean, thank you so much. Thank you to you and to your team for this extraordinary program, your hospitality, and for those of you who are not with us in person but watching virtually. Cornell Tech is it's a jewel in the crown, Congressman, of the Cornell global infrastructure. And we're so happy to be here. Assemblyman, thank you also for joining us. There are at the moment about 10 Cornell students whose commitment to this conversation is so deep and so intense that they woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning and got on the bus in Ithaca. And that bus is somewhere between Ithaca and Roosevelt Island at this moment, but actually they're due in about 20 minutes. So in about 20 minutes, with a slight disruption, there'll be 10 students who'll be joining us, but they paid the price, 5 hours or 6 hours on a bus ride. We will accommodate them. What you should also know before I pose my first question is that Congressman Lieu's commitment to this issue, his leadership to this issue is demonstrated in the fact that he didn't wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. He got on a 10 o'clock, I guess, flight or whatever it was last night, took the red eye to be here with us. And then at exactly 11:35, he needs to leave, get on a flight to Washington, D.C. So we appreciate your dedication, your energy. So let me begin with the first question. On Saturday night, Congressman, I had the privilege of attending a dinner in Chicago, organized by the 1111 Foundation. Wendy Abrams, who I believe is viewing this, who you know, a Californian, has created a new foundation, and her special guest was Hillary Clinton, and the issue of AI came up. And this is what Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said as recently as Saturday night on the topic of AI. She said that observers of AI put its impact somewhere between a nuisance that we have to figure out how to manage and an existential threat to human decision making. She didn't take a position on where she is between those two poles, but I'm curious, how do you see it?
Sure. So thank you for that question. Let me first say I'm going to be on the floor of the House of Representatives tonight. I want to tell you what a thrill it is for me to now sit in front of normal and rational. Thank you, Dean Morrison, for your leadership. Honored to be here next to Steve Israel, and thank you, Alex, for your leadership as well. So I'll just give you my view of how I think AI should be regulated from a perspective of a lawmaker. And to be a sort of, best now there's two bodies of water. So you've got a large ocean of AI and then this small lake of AI. So large ocean of AI is all the AI we don't care about. So if your smart toaster has a preference for wheat toast over white toast, you don't care about them. So that could be like the nuisance part of it. So this small lake is to be the AI we might want to regulate. And there's three buckets. So the first is AI that can destroy the world, right? Ones that have an existential threat. So the Department of Defense has what are known as autonomous weapons that launch automatically. I've introduced bipartisan legislation that basically says no matter how amazing AI gets, we're never going to let it decide to launch a nuclear weapon by itself. There always has to be a human in it. A second bucket would be AI that isn't going to destroy the world, but can kill you individually. So when your cell phone malfunctions, it's not going 45 miles per hour. Turns out there's a lot of AI in moving objects, planes, trains, automobiles. My view is we need more regulators and more regulators that are attuned to unique aspects of AI. And third would be the hardest, which is generalized harm from AI that doesn't kill anyone, but can be quite harmful. So for example, facial recognition technology is pretty amazing. It does have a bias against folks with darker skin. And so my view is we deploy this nationwide. It's a huge equal protection violation because minorities will be misidentified at higher rates. AI is very good at spreading disinformation. AI is very good at hacking. So there's all sorts of things that we might want to look at regulating. Very hard to do that. If you were to ask me, let's regulate AI next week, I don't know how we would define it. And so I've introduced a bipartisan bill to create a national AI commission to make recommendations to Congress as to what AI we might want to regulate, how we might want to go about doing this. So that's sort of my view, and I guess my answer to Hillary's question would be all of the above.
All of the above. All right. We're trying to figure out that issue. I hear, please.
Hi, I'm Sean Kaufman from Pace University. I don't think this is critical of him, I don't mean it to, but with the signing of the executive order, spokesperson President Biden said that Mission Impossible, the new movie, really like changed the way that you use AI, with AI being the villain in that movie. And why I don't mean it's not critical is I'm sure that's true for a lot of people. But I wonder, as a lawmaker, experts in the field who's been talking about this for a long time, how do you, I guess part of it is the human thing, how do you deal with that frustration of being like, if only someone had been talking about this or had written an op-ed in the New York Times about this in January, like when people sort of like are trying to head to consent for so long. Like, how do you, I guess, what strategies do you use to communicate to folks who are better reached by a Mission Impossible movie than a New York Times op-ed?
You know, Alex would agree with me, just being in politics, a lot of people just don't pay attention to a lot of things, which is fine, because they're very busy people, right? They have things going on in their life. And so you just try to keep educating folks and keep putting out information. By the way, I like the Mission Impossible movies. They're quite good. But that sort of goes to sort of show that all this was happening before the generative AI models came out last year. And no one, right, was probably freaked out that you can navigate anywhere on your phone. That voice recognition is pretty amazing. That there's all this stuff with AI all over the place. No one really batted an eye. It was when essentially ChatGPT launched and you could type stuff in and it responded to you almost like a human being. That's, I think, when people went, oh, hey, this is something that could be a society change.
Please.
I'm Wendy Erb. I'm an MIT undergrad, Stanford Law School grad. And one of the things that was said is getting people to be more skeptical, which made me think back to an issue that still seeking for an answer for more than 50 years. How do you teach common sense? How do you get people to have common sense? And I haven't found a good answer to that in dealing with people, but you need that for your AI vehicle, because otherwise garbage in, garbage out. Back in the late 60s, there was permitted AI at MIT. I remember one of my classmates, we sat in front of a computer, we could type questions that would answer things. But as you are working on trying to struggle with regulating AI, because it can be very useful. If we haven't figured out to put common sense into it, we're up a creek without a paddle without even realizing.
So thank you for that question. I think the best way to think about AI is it's a tool. It's not sentient, it's not a person. And the tool can be used for both good or bad things. And you can try and make the tool better, but ultimately, as long as you have a human in a loop somewhere, I think that can solve some of this, maybe not all of it. But it's really hard to sort of regulate an AI algorithm. You might be able to try to regulate certain use cases and say, look, we're just not going to let AI control a nuclear weapon. You could do what you're trying to do in New York with putting restrictions on AI and on hiring. But there's going to be 759 use cases, right? And it's just going to be impossible for the government to do that. I think at some point, you're going to need some sort of regulatory agency to do that. And it can be done, right? So we still don't have a really good grasp of how individual molecules interact with the human body. And we have an entire FDA that regulates drugs. So we can do this. Just because we don't understand something exactly doesn't mean we can't try to regulate it. And so I think we might get there eventually. We're just at the early stages. And again, we have to see a little bit of how AI sort of plays out. I just want to conclude with this. AI is mostly going to be amazingly beneficial, especially in the medical field. I'm not an expert in human protein coding, but it used to take one person 5 years getting a PhD to tell you how to code one human protein. AI has coded over 200 million human proteins known to humankind, given that to medical researchers. So you're just going to start seeing pretty cool medical advancements, and it's going to make a lot more human tasks more efficient. It's generally going to be beneficial to society. We just have to make sure it doesn't kill us.
Are we going to be sure that we're getting appropriate results from that? And I raised that from the question of the FDA, of course, regulates drugs. And I forget whether it was Advil or something like that, that after years of it being an approved drug for certain uses, it's like the pronouncement came out that no, it really did nothing. And I forget, I'm probably not remembering correctly which drug it was, but it's something over the counter frequently used.
It was a version of Sudafed. Oh yes, government agencies make mistakes. Absolutely. Yeah. Can't really.
All right, yes, please.
It's maybe a policy question. Been thinking about it, and you keep raising.
Please identify yourself.
Oh, sorry, Scott Bronson, Brookhaven National Lab. WMD and AI. And so it's an obvious that we've decided, but another nation may say that's not in their self-interest, it's just saying. And I've been thinking, has the time come for something like IAEA for this area? Is there a way to share, even with near peer, what we may describe as an adversary? Is there a way to do this in a way that even the way Brookhaven was set up, for the peaceful use of the atom, with all the risks that they do at the time it's managed for peace? and stuff like this. I worked on the Human Genome Project, we were pretty savvy about that, we put a lot of money into that, we put social media implications. Would something exist at the UN for this yet?
I met the UN earlier this year, so they're having meetings about that issue. Now, just my view on letting AI launch into a weapon by itself, I believe the US should never have that happen, regardless of what other countries do. I think it should just be a policy and a law that just says, no, that's never gonna happen. But there are other cases where you might think it would be helpful if you had some sort of international cooperation. So I'm just gonna throw out this issue. I don't have a good response to it right now. The question is basically, should you allow open source, very, very powerful AI? So right now, if you went to, let's say Google's Bard, which is the large language model, and you type in, tell me how to create a lethal virus to start the next pandemic. They'll tell you I can't do that, or I won't do that, or so on. Meta has put out an open source large language model right now, Llama 2. That also will tell you it won't do that, except open source models, you can sort of take the guardrails off pretty easily. So then the question is, well, do we want that? I mean, what if it's very powerful in a few years from now, and then you have no guardrails, you can just type stuff in that says, hey, how do I create this virus? It's just something to think about.
Please.
Hi, I'm Yishan Chaudhary. I'm an undergraduate at Cornell on behalf of the Cornell Tech Policy Institute. A lot about what you're talking about, especially the regulatory body, is almost like just what you're touching upon. It's like putting on overall like set of objective morals and ethics, especially to guide AI as we move forward, especially towards AI that like don't have as much human involvement. But fundamentally, that can almost be seen as like almost like an un-American ideal of like trying to put like certain guidelines and boundaries. So how do you navigate that, especially to like a political scene today when legislation is like so dearly needed, but like AI is like moving at such a fast pace that like legislation is not matching it at the current status quo.
Where are you from, if I may ask?
Like my hometown, Princeton, New Jersey.
Okay.
So thank you for the question. As a lawmaker, and just sort of looking at the different jurisdictions you have, the American ideal, in fact, is regulation. Right? We regulate drugs, we regulate cars, we regulate planes, we regulate a lot of aspects of things that you use. So it is fully consistent with American ideal. Should we choose to regulate AI? The question, how would you go about doing that? Now, the Biden executive order, what President Biden is basically saying is, okay, look, I'm not going to create a whole new regulatory agency. I'm just going to empower every one of my agencies to go ahead and start doing what they can in their subject areas to regulate AI that they believe could harm people or needs regulation.
Please.
Hi, Jillian Goldfarb, I'm a professor of chemical engineering at Cornell. And as someone who has both NYSERDA, New York State funding, and federal funding for my research projects, one of the bottlenecks we see is that it takes a long time to impanel a panel of experts to judge your proposals. And there's also a lot of bias in that process. So I'm kind of coming at this from not the regulatory standpoint, but maybe the light at the end of the tunnel standpoint. How do you think AI could be used in a positive way to help kind of break some of this bureaucratic gridlock, other people face to get through? Is there a positive side to this?
AI will make a lot of human tasks more efficient. And, so I'll give you an example. I was talking to a Amazon executive who said software programmers using AI are about 30% more efficient. Amazon has a program called Amazon Code Whisperer that is autocomplete essentially for coders. So if you sort of run that out, that means that a programmer using AI will be more efficient on a 4-day work week than a programmer now in a 5-day work week. Well, what do you do with it?
Going to do what Congress is best at, and that is to filibuster. I want to just make sure that you all know that we do have some additional programs coming up at the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Cornell. We were supposed to be in Israel on December 6th for a conference with the University of Tel Aviv on the impact of the US elections on the bilateral relationship between Israel and the United States. That obviously has been rescheduled. It looks like it will be either in February or May. That will be a live conference in Tel Aviv, but it will also obviously have a virtual option. We hope that you will join us for that. We are also doing a conference on Roosevelt's Four Freedoms. This is quite pertinent because this island, as many of you know, is where Roosevelt delivered, FDR delivered that famous Four Freedoms speech. We have arranged with Hyde Park and the FDR Presidential Library to do a conference at Hyde Park over a weekend where we will be assessing the state of each one of the four freedoms, both nationally and globally. That will be a live event at Hyde Park. That has also been postponed. It was scheduled for the day after the shutdown in October, and Hyde Park was making plans to close. That will be sometime in the spring. We hope you will join us for that. Are we ready to go? Can I stop filibustering? And we hope that you'll join us. This is what we do. We do these small salons with key members of Congress, building bridges between experts in the community and business, on campus, faculty, students. So we hope that you'll participate in future events. With that, can I hand it over to you, sir?
Absolutely.
All right, Professor Doug Crine.
Thank you so much, everyone. What an unenviable task trying to follow Representative Liu in the assemblyman, but I will do my best. So what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is sort of more of a political science perspective, someone who doesn't actually code or do anything with AI except use it a little bit, and then examine some of the consequences that it might have for different aspects of democratic representation and what politics looks like in the United States. And so I try not to paint too dark of a portrait, but I do think there are some pretty serious threats. And some of them actually, I think, sort of the answers to some of your questions earlier highlight some of the concerns that I would have about the way in which AI may have an even more corrosive influence in what are already pre-corroded politics today. So if we go to a good humanities classroom and we start thinking about sort of what are the tenets of democratic theory, Robert Dahl, great political philosopher, would argue in many senses that there are three separate pillars, right? There's representation. We live in a representative democracy, not a direct democracy. There's accountability. Can individual citizens hold elected officials accountable for the decisions that they make? That requires us actually knowing what it is that they do and having access to accurate information, something that might be skewed by misinformation that we're picking up from social media and other sources. And then underlying all of it is the notion of social trust. So just sort of to preview that, because I don't want to talk too long, one of the things that Congressman Liu said was that it would be better if we view everything with a little more skepticism, a heavy dose of skepticism. Trust in this country, in governing institutions and the media, has gone steadily cratering since Watergate. And now we're asking people to be even more skeptical of what you read, because you can't trust what it is that you see necessarily. Maybe you have to look for a watermark. Where do I look for the watermark? What will the watermark tell me? Can someone bunge the watermark? This is a big question, and sort of, what are the long-term consequences going to be? So I'm going to focus mainly on the representation aspect from two different angles here real fast, talking about one research project really quickly that's complete and another one that we just started. So one of the questions that we started with here was, how do representatives get information about what their constituents want? And can generative AI threaten that fundamental link of representation accountability? So to try and find out for this, we formed a partnership with OpenAI back several years ago. It's kind of quaint now because it was GPT-3 that we were using, but it was before the public launch of ChatGPT. So we had access to GPT-3 and we sent more than 32,000 emails to about 7,000 state legislators. Between 3 and 6 usually is what most receive. The trick that they didn't know was that half of these emails were written by undergraduate students, so thank you for all of our research assistants that did this on 6 different issues that were advocating either a liberal or a conservative position on either issue, asking their legislator to consider it and to take it into account, and the other half were produced by GPT-3. And so what we were doing in sort of a standard audit field experiment was comparing response rates and the nature of the responses, if we got a response from legislators, to try and get a sense of, can legislators suss out what is now old technology? Or are they responding at the same rates and in the same ways to artificially generated content as they are to genuine constituent written communication? So here's just one real quick first cut at the response rates. And as you can see, if you put 16,000 in one group and 16,000 in another group, you can make almost any difference statistically significant. And this is statistically significant. So legislators responded significantly lower rates to AI than to human generated content, but substantively it's really, really small. For the most part, these are meaningless differences. Not much evidence that legislators were able to tell, sans watermark or something else, queuing them off, that AI was writing constituent concerns. On 3 issues, we did see significant differences. Which sort of suggests that at least the older algorithm was better at some issues than others. And on 3, gun control, health, and education, we saw no significant differences whatsoever. One other way in which you might cut this really quickly is, well, maybe legislators are responding, but they're just sort of saying, are you crazy? Are you real? Is there a difference qualitatively in the responses? So we had undergraduates and ourselves look at them to try and see if we could see differences. Another quick one is just to use a proxy of length of the response from the legislator. As you can see again on this metric, very little evidence of any significant difference to AI versus human. So we also then debriefed our legislators, thanked them for their participation, told them the purpose of the study, and invited their feedback. And when we listened to them, some of them would say, oh, you know what, I did notice that there was something wrong. And from this, we sort of hoped that we might distill out some lessons that others could use. Sometimes GPT-3 was ideologically inconsistent, especially on gun control, we found, even though there was no significant difference. It struggled to write a conservative argument on gun control, in that it would sort of make some good Second Amendment arguments, then it would say other things that would lead you to think it was actually taking the contrary position. Maybe the number one thing that legislators pointed out is, this isn't how people in my district talk. A couple people flagged that on some of the AI emails. But I think technological advances since we conducted the study back in 2021, I think these tells are going to be fewer and further between as GPT-4 and subsequent releases are getting even better. What I do think is perhaps an even more, this is a big problem, I think. If you're an elected official, how do you trust any sort of electronic communication as being a genuine signal from your constituents about what they want? Another thing that I think might be an even bigger threat, something that we're trying to address in some ongoing research, has to do with the regulatory process. So we talked about the executive order from the Biden administration. Why executive order? Because we're not able to pass a law, right? It's really tough, and there's a whole bunch of issues on which, and it doesn't have to do just with regulating AI, right? How is all of the, so much of the environmental change happening? It happens to the regulatory process when Congress is gridlocked. All right. So what governs how the regulatory process works in terms of the opportunity for public comment? It's a law from the 1920s. It's the Administrative Procedures Act. And the APA requires that administrative agencies give the public the opportunity to comment and then to take reasonable and responsible action in response to the feedback that they receive. In about 2002, the government moved to something called e-rulemaking, and it was going to democratize this process by making it a whole lot less cumbersome to actually give your feedback to a regulatory agency and making it so that you can do it with just a few clicks online. But now, opens up the door for generative AI to stream into these systems to create sort of a false sense of public sentiment, one, but possibly also expertise sentiment as well. So one quick case of what this looks like in practice. So you may remember the debate over net neutrality in 2017. The FCC was considering abolishing the rules that had underpinned net neutrality, and they got 8 million public comments. Fortunately, they were able to pretty quickly suss out that there was something weird going on here because about 90% of them were non-unique. This is what's called astroturfing, which is a term that goes way back in the 50s, I believe. A senator determined that there were non-constituents that were flooding him with snail mail at the time, trying to influence his vote on an issue in Texas. And this is pretty easy for the FCC to suss out and to sort of say, it's fine under APA for us to ignore it. Generative AI makes that obsolete. You're not going to have 90 or 7.4 million or whatever comments that look almost identical. Every single one of them will hit different every time you hit generate. Just say, write me a comment about this, and you'll get it. So real quickly, some of the research that we're now undertaking is looking not just at can generative AI write public comments for or against an issue that people won't be able to tell the difference. I think we all know the answer to that is yes. The question is, what about expert sentiment? There are lots of studies in the law literature that suggest that regulators, even though they're supposed to look at all of these comments, they really only care about technically sophisticated comments. Those are the ones that matter. And technically sophisticated comments by individuals have almost the same weight as those from organizations in studies, empirical studies that have been done on this. But now the question is, can ChatGPT write a technically sophisticated comment? Will it hallucinate? Will it lie to you? And will anyone know or care as they're reading it? So we're planning on sort of working on a study that's going to try and investigate these, both with a sample of scientific experts that are evaluating these comments, as well as regulators and the regulatory consultants that aid regulators in trying to manage and make sense of this process. So, wow, there's animation, sorry. So I'd just like to briefly thank the other partners on my research team. So Professor Goldfarb, Professor Sarah Krebs, and thank the Cornell Center for Social Sciences for the support to make this next study possible.
Well, for the folks who came in recently, the students, first of all, welcome to Cornell Tech. I'm on the faculty of the Information Science Department. I'm Helen Nissenbaum, and I'm the director of the Digital Life Initiative at Cornell Tech, which looks at ethics, politics, quality of life in digital societies. I have a background in philosophy, a PhD from Stanford University, and a little bit of a technical background, but collaborate a lot with computer scientists and so on. So the work that I'm going to talk about today is based on an article that actually has not yet been published, and it's with a PhD student, Ben Laufer, and it was developed under the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University that had a project on algorithmic amplification, and that's the topic of what I'm going to talk about today. So we're all familiar with online ills. There's the hate speech, there's threats, there's harassment, filter bubbles, extremism, hatred, and I'm not going to read through everything on the slide. I just want to establish a kind of common ground of some of the concerns that many of us, including members of government, have with the state of the online environment. And we rely on experts who've cracked the toxic atmosphere online. Maybe it really jumped out at us in 2016. At that moment, there are these signal moments where suddenly we realized that was this going on, the polarization, the extremism, the mis and disinformation, and so on. And so there's been a lot of attention to why this is happening, what it means, what are the causes, and so forth. So sometime in the past few years, academics, experts, and news journalists had started using the term amplification. They pointed to algorithmic amplification as one of the reasons or one of the sources of this kind of toxic environment in the online environment, in particular looking at social media platforms, for example, Facebook. I would say that some of the mis and disinformation that we're experiencing emerges from things like ad networks that keep the so-called fake, that had kept this, and probably still do, the fake news websites profitable, happening outside of the United States and having really disruptive effects on our politics and democracy and so much else. Now we had been looking at this literature, looking at some of the commentaries, and we were concerned by the confusion or the unclarity in the way these concepts were being used. And so we decided that some of what we need to do is impose some clarity on the discussion. I'm a philosopher, as I mentioned, of the analytic school, and so what we try to do a lot of the time is impose clarity. Ben is more technically inclined, and he and I have been collaborating on this. So we come to a definition of algorithmic amplification: automated procedures used by online platforms, publishers, and other services for the purpose of selectively expanding the reach and prominence of content. That's algorithmic amplification. And then, of course, the dynamic effects that things can, the spread can be exponential because of these dynamic effects and increase and increase. So we, just to further explain what we mean by, and we add automated algorithmic amplification. Some of this is delivered computationally. It doesn't have to be, because you can amplify in other ways. But and a lot of this is AI driven. You can either amplify for everybody, or what this technology, digital tech, is really good at, as we know, is to actually identify particular individuals who are prone to be manipulable in certain ways, and hence this idea of the filter bubble. So these are all the functions that we attribute to automated algorithmic amplification. You can highlight some things, you can suppress other things, you can curate. And if you look on this side, here are some of the products that I'm going to guess everybody in the room has experienced at least some of these products daily, frequently. Any kind of recommender system is in the business of amplification and suppression. Reddit, ad targeting has been doing this for years. Even fundamentally, search engines, when you type in a search, you get back some of the returns, and that's a form of amplification. So the thing to say here is that algorithmic amplification is not necessarily a bad thing. There's so much stuff, so many people online. You actually need some kind of recommendation to point you in the right directions. And so we realized that we actually needed not only to define what algorithmic amplification is in a clear way, but we needed to identify what is problematic about algorithmic. When is algorithmic amplification problematic? And if we can, perhaps we could break some of these vicious loops. So one approach is what we're seeing a lot of today, which is content moderation. And you can see, we just picked this up from the media, how much Facebook says it has spent $13 billion on safety and security efforts since 2016. So the idea is, let's look at this noxious stuff and get rid of it. And this is what I'm calling content moderation. We're looking at the effects of amplification, and we're trying to get rid of the bad stuff. Now, what we felt, or what we argued, is that when you're spending that much money on content moderation, the problem from our point of view is that you're treating the symptoms and you're not treating the underlying causes. So yes, I've got the fever, I'm sneezing, a sore throat and that. We can give you these palliative medications, but shouldn't we figure out whether you've got COVID, RSV, and so forth, so we can get to what underlies that? And our concern is that it's not accidental that companies like Facebook are only pointing us to content and saying, oh, don't worry, we're going to get rid of this noxious content. We want to look under the hood and see what's going on. We think, how many of you know what this is? Okay. All right, we all know what this is. That content moderation is like a game of whack-a-mole. So we come up with a definition of problematic algorithmic amplification, which are formal procedures that not only are amplified, but they undermine, disrupt, and displace trusted and trustworthy processes. And I felt I could hear some of these concerns in some of the questions to Congressman Liu, which is that we have evolved trustworthy processes over so many years. And for us, just working on this, it was so productive to think how many times, and some of the students talking about citations, practices that we've employed over a century, and we trust them to arrive at good, sound knowledge. And here is what we're looking at. Our paper focused on what we call epistemic processes. This is something philosophers have been thinking about for some time. What processes do we go through from evidence, for example, to conclusion, where we can rely and say these processes are sound? So we had this imagined Trump supporter who is interested, we asked this question, who won the 2020, unlike Doug, we didn't do an empirical study. This was the thought experiment. Who won the 2020 presidential election? So the Trump supporter goes to the sources they're interested in. They go to Twitter and they say, oh, of course Trump won the election. Look at all these people who are saying Trump won the election. So you could go to the New York Times and even, say Fox News, but really what we're depending on is these ages-old processes we've developed in democratic societies for voting, for vote counting, reporting of results. And this is just to gloss over the myriad of little rules, norms, conventions that at the end of it, we say, this is who won the election, because we followed these rules and regulations. We also have these processes for achieving knowledge to arrive at trustworthy information. And the question for us is, does algorithmic amplification overshadow these processes? And I'm just going to leave you with 3 familiar instances of algorithmic displacement and why treating symptoms is not enough. So one is the fact that we have this attention economy, and this results often in the filter bubbles, polarization, kind of outrage. We find that, for example, and there's lots of evidence, the whistleblower for Facebook, that engagement-driven algorithms elevate and amplify short, simple, controversial, vitriolic, humorous posts. If true, they're only accidentally true. So this particular form of algorithmic amplification is connected with these noxious outcomes. Sometimes something innocuous like Reddit, upvote, downvote, we have a tyranny of the majority. So here's something we just, like a few days ago, checked Reddit. This was the most popular post. I don't know if you can read it. This hotel provides hair dryers, but tells guests not to use them. So this had bubbled to the top. Is it true? I have no idea. I can only tell you, at the time, it was voted the most popular piece of news. So we mustn't confuse popularity with truth. And sometimes we do, upvote, downvote. Yelp, for example. And then finally, in Twitter, now X, there's a discouragement of the kind of processes that journalists are told to use, where you have to cite your sources, you have to cite their expertise to convince people that you're accountable and you're a good, sound journalist. But in fact, these particular algorithms will increase your visibility only if you don't. They don't like links in Twitter. So you can't actually check what people are saying. And finally, no talk is complete without a mention of generative AI. Our concern, I know it's a bit science fiction, yes, hallucinations, but when we lose the processes, how will we be able to check? How will the student in the school who's relying on dogmatic statements check? Will they remember how to? Will they know what it means to generate sound knowledge? So this is the work we've done. We don't really know what to recommend, but at least one of them is that we need transparency of the algorithms, not the code. People talk about interpretability, explainability. What we need is for folks who are using algorithmic amplification to talk about purpose. To what are these algorithms optimized? That's it. Thank you.
We have about 20 minutes for Q&A before the conference adjourns. I do want to say, by the way, that when you talked about those legislators who said that the AI-generated communications didn't sound like their constituents, I represented Long Island, so if we got a letter that didn't include the F word about 4 times, it was not coming from my district. Thank you for that perspective. Let me lead off and then raise your hands. We'll go around the table. We'll start with you. But I do want to ask, Professor, my colleagues in Congress, and I know in the folks that I talked to in the Biden administration, Professor Nissenbaum, boil this down to either the government is going to have to do something, or we're going to have to rely on the voluntary efforts of industry to do something. Do you have a sense of what does the government have tools? Is the government the proper regulatory authority on this at a certain point?
Yes, I don't. It's not in the interest of I'm just going to say big tech to reveal this kind of information, and it will not happen because there's too much at stake in the trade secrecy, in the competition and so forth, for companies to actually reveal the kind of information we need. And there's a lot of smokescreen because you can produce the lines of code in your algorithm, it's meaningless. So we need to get to the nub of around what is this algorithm optimized? And that's the part that we're seeing come out in, like, if we have whistleblowers. So I think we need government to step in.
All right, please.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Jaswal from Farmingdale State College. So one of my questions is really about the black box theory of AI. The AI is taking place in a black box. How can we actually know what the algorithm's intentions are? Because these algorithms are continuously developing, continuously regenerating, continuously adding new information, new content based on our prompts, our information. How can we actually go and determine what the purpose of it is? Because the purpose is continuously evolving. I think it kind of goes with your algorithm.
All of the above.
Or all of the above.
That answer is easier to ask than the question about, like, how it works. Because if a company is drawing on AI to perform certain functions, then what is it that you want the system to do for you? That's the answer that we actually need, and we can produce it. My next project is going to be, now I don't know, those of us who live in these kinds of environments, we've heard our colleagues, we've heard it time and again, they act as if these neural nets that underlie any AI, but this particular approach, they'll say, oh, we really don't know how it works, as if there's some kind of mysterious thing happening. But we do know that they know how to tweak the system to make it work differently than it is today. So even though they deny, in my view, accountability for a certain form of functionality, they do know how to control the beast. And that's where I think we need to demand more from them. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Real quick response, I would say I would be fascinated with the study that we're trying to do on sort of writing comments on regulations on an technical environmental question. A really good study design would get 4 times the amount of money and do it at 4 separate points in time, right? And we've all seen that ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 have gone up and down in their ability to do math, depending on what the latest tweak to the algorithm is, right? And so, if you're using an out of the box, just sort of, engine that way, I would imagine that the capacity of it to do a good job is going to change, and we don't really know what it's going to be. For someone that's more savvy, that's going to sort of train their own model, then I think it might be more consistent. But with a lot of this stuff, I think even the different threats, some of the threats to governmental processes are going to vary depending on what the model looks like at any one moment in time.
Other questions? Yes, please.
So your presentations, you guys talked a lot about these bigger umbrella problems that weigh into everything that we're dealing with AI today. When it comes to the Twitter example of them not allowing links, it's a very simple industry thing of Twitter wants to maximize attention span. Links are just too many characters, so then they will have less users on the platform. So when it comes to these industry standard things where more and more people every other startup today wants to go into AI and do something like that. How much of the onus is it on us as an industry regulatory stance versus on us as almost a social problem stance of critical thinking and looking beyond?
One of the things I always say is never bet against the ignorance of the average voter, right? The median voter doesn't know much about anything. The median voter doesn't care much about anything. And I think that's something that Congressman Liu brought up before too. It's a good thing in some sense, right? That you might have 1 or 2 issues that really motivate you, and then someone else is going to have 1 or 2 issues that really motivate them. The rest of what the federal government does, or the state, even the state and local government, you just don't care. And so, the flip side of that, to try and answer your question, is sort of to ask responsible citizens to be stronger and more selective consumers. I just think that that's fanciful, given everything we know about human behavior and everything we know about homus politicus. That's just not how it works. Maybe one last sort of or slightly orthogonal point that still speaks to this is there is a big question, and it's really hard to get a precise empirical estimate, but how much damage does this do, and what does the damage look like, and do people tend to, does misinformation change a lot of minds? The best work I've seen on this suggests that it doesn't. For one of the things that was on Professor Nissenbaum's slide, because we already have all of these, we live in filter bubbles, right? Congressman Lewis said, it's not even social media, right? I watch MSNBC, you watch Fox. And so most of what you're getting is already just reinforcing your priors anyway. That it's not like it's taking someone who is on one side of a conflict and moving them to the other. That rarely happens. What I'm more worried about is that flip side of, well, now it's like, I used to always know I couldn't trust the other side, but now I can't even trust anything that I'm getting. And so a nihilistic response is almost the rational response, the economically rational response to an completely transformed and convoluted media environment, and what are the consequences of that for the social structure that underpins democracy?
I would add a little bit to that, which is we have soft spot for Reddit, by the way. And I think because, in some of the other work that I was really interested in like comments-based hit production, and Reddit just struck me as terrific, democratizing news and so forth. But then I started thinking that the processes that work for some things and not for other things, and what's really important is that we figure out whether the particular process is matched to the goal that we set forth. So even you take Yelp, we say, how many stars or whatever. This is a popularity contest, and it's a similar thing we might do if we read some, the Washington Post food critic. Very different processes for achieving a certain end. So if we want truth and reliability on a certain scientific question, then we must know this is a process. But if it's popularity, yeah, that's an interesting thing too, but it's not well matched. And what I'm concerned about is that some of the social media companies are not being clear about, and that's what we need from them.
Congressman Liu brought up the potential danger in open source and people running their own AI. I want to kind of ask the counter question. We're in the early stages, but it seems one company, OpenAI, who created ChatGPT, is dominating the marketplace, and they're heavily invested in by Microsoft, and Microsoft's embedded into their technology. So what's the danger of just one company having this level of control and being the one that essentially is tweaking the algorithm, so to speak?
Slightly disagree with the congressman's, because for those people, and maybe I put myself in this category, the one thing about open source, is that it's open to inspection. And though OpenAI is not open in its name, it's absolutely not open for inspection. I agree completely. We have laws which we're finding more and more difficult to move against monopolies and so forth, but this is a danger.
The only thing I would wonder is, Europe is much more aggressively antitrust than we are.
Yeah.
And so one thing that Congressman mentioned is like, well, they're regulating, these states are regulating, municipalities are regulating, and it will be interesting to see to what extent sort of the response to that is not led by the federal government, but that it comes from outside.
Housekeeping, we have 10 minutes left. Raise your hand if you have a question. All right, so one, remember your number, Josh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So ask your questions concisely, all right? The first 3. So I have no capacity to say.
Yeah. It's for Professor Kreiner, you spoke a little bit to the other regulatory process. I know Congressman Liu spoke about the importance of building a regulatory structure, but as you said, that structure is susceptible to technology that it's trying to regulate. So my question is about, you spoke a lot about how that susceptibility, and I'm wondering if there's any discussions in federal agencies who are creating these regulations about how to ensure that their feedback, stuff they're trying to synthesize, when they're getting all this feedback, is not tainted by artificial intelligence.
Virginia, Michael Seitz, Cornell alum. Prefacing the question, I was born and raised in a district on Long Island that was formerly represented by Congressman Israel and now is represented by Congressman George Santos. Going back to Professor Kreiner's three points, yeah, very pertinent about representation, accountability, and social trust. Should there be, and is there a role for AI in putting our public officials and leaders of the future under a tighter microscope in terms of even before they run for election and while they serve in public office, again, from a misinformation and just accountability framework? And number three.
As was mentioned earlier, kind of reflects the thoughts and kind of perceptions that humanity is putting out. It's directly taking that information. So I guess on that note, how do we reconcile with that information? Is there anything being done regarding like AI as like AI exposure to like filter that information? Yeah.
Take it away.
Okay. Let me speak really quickly to the first one, maybe, and I'll do it quickly. Take the third, great. I'll try the first two then real quickly. Oh yes, regulatory structures, self-hosted analogy. So here, I think one of the problems is that the law that governs it from 1929 it still is. I hope I got that right. I'm pretty sure it's Administrative Procedures Act. And I've talked to a number of lawyers in regulatory agencies, and like everyone says, oh well, that's fine, right? We'll have AI to detect AI generated text, right? And I think OpenAI is tuned for that last week before they pulled it because it's bad. And the question is, from it's a very legalistic one. What's the acceptable error rate under the APA? Because say that you can get to 90% accuracy in detecting AI generated text, that would be impressive. They're clearly not anywhere close to that. Could you throw out 10% comments that are legitimate comments written by American citizens to influence the process of their government? Most of the lawyers I talk to say no. So it's going to require some new legislation that's going to clarify the way in which this can be used. Because right now you would need incredibly sophisticated tools of incredibly high degrees of accuracy to not fall afoul of the existing rules we have. So we are very, very susceptible. Some of them, some use RE CAPTCHA and other things that might cut down on this or that these raise the burden area. There are others where it's just an email address. Send your comment here. Okay, well, we could find someone in ComSci 101 that could just bombard that with comments and we can. So that's really interesting and I think problematic in that way. And then quickly on the role for AI and scrutiny of elected officials. I have not thought of that. One, I think that there are advantages in the ways in which you can use AI, like for responding to constituent concerns. I think, especially at the state and the local level, this could be really helpful for getting information into people's hands quickly. But I think it would be really interesting to see who uses this in the way in which, we talked about how undergrads could use this. I would love to have the same panel of journalists and ask, to what extent do you use it? And I wonder if what might be more useful in that way is it's astounding just how much text you have available to you, and then using sort of classifiers and other sorts of large language models that aren't generative AI, but that are detecting these sorts of inconsistencies that then might be able to flag it in a much faster way, adding to the sort of old school, Woodward and Bernstein type stuff. So really interesting. So I'd like to learn more about.
Yeah, your question is like a philosopher's delight, because which of AI is feeding on through large language models is written language that is computationally accessible. So essentially, if whatever the content is computationally accessible, it exists. And if it isn't, it doesn't exist. And when you're talking about thoughts of humanity and how it reflects existing humanity, just keep in mind that it actually only is capturing a fraction of humans and what is it missing.
4, 5, 6. It was number 4, yeah.
do with the financial incentive behind the implementation of information, like ads specifically. So with kind of this like the most attention grabbing thing makes the most money for the app. So like how do you regulate those incentives without over regulating it? Also, if they're making so much money out of it, there might be some pushback of regulation. Like how do you find that balance between allowing, you know, companies to have like ads and have free applications while still taking away the incentive to have that harm humanity with the way that the algorithm is made for that?
Yeah.
One of the areas that I focus on is business model innovation, and kind of building off of the last question, this idea of the attention economy and the business model behind that and how our algorithms are designed, as well as the features that are designed as part of the products, reinforce that. Have you explored, or do you know of kind of any other ways in which we could think about, instead of monetizing data for these types of kind of social ill that reinforce social ills, ways in which we could think of other, you know, kind of other types of business models that don't necessarily monetize data for that purpose, or even just refer to subscriptions as the business model that we could refer to also?
Lucas Galliolo, I'm a Cornell student. Thank you both for your presentations. I really liked them. I thought that both presentations started to kind of pose the question of artificial intelligence and alignment. How do we align these models? How do we make sure that they keep our values as humans? And I think Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, recently went on, I think, like Joe Rogan's podcast or something, and he started talking about the ways that he would like to bring, you know, world and national leaders together to try to draw up a set of AI guidelines, and then say, hey, we've got this document, this is what we believe are the human values that AI should, it should encompass. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that that will solve any ills? Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Discussion and the buy-in of many of the other big tech owners. I'm suspicious of some of the language, and in particular, I'm suspicious of the term safety. And I know Biden has brought into this term safety, and I'll tell you why. Because safety is something that we can all get, but we can also honor safety. When you mention, say, the FDA, as the congressman did, we're in a space where we can agree, sickness, death, injury, we all, think those are bad things and we want to cure them. But a lot of the values that are at stake in these technologies, there isn't a single, and we're not talking about those uncomfortable things. Like privacy is a case where there are winners and losers. Your data is enriching me, but you're now endangered by that, whereas I'm doing very well, thank you very much. And then when we average it all out, it looks great. So I want to push back against the alignment unless we bring in those discussions of the winners and the losers. I think justice is another one of those values that are at stake and kind of being tamped down. With the other questions, I mean, these are business expert, and I think what you're talking about looking for other business models is absolutely critical, and there have been explorations of that, because when we say, oh, but how are we going to make money if not using Shoshana Zuboff's term, surveillance capitalism, which I have my arguments with that, but we have to say, oh, look, if we didn't use child labor, we may not be able to make Nikes, sell them as cheaply as that. And we're saying, no, we have to draw the line. So they're hard questions for those balances, and I rely on you guys
I can briefly speak to the incentives question. So I think a lot of this, especially when it comes to social media algorithms, it comes down to what is social media? What is the platform? Is it a public forum, or is it a news provider that manages the content on its site? Right. So in this all comes down to your interpretation under Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Act. And it's revising Section 230 was one of the few things that then candidate Biden and President Trump at the time agreed on during the last campaign. Trump didn't like it because he's like, look, it's a public forum. You don't moderate the content on it. Stop taking down my stuff by calling it lies and violating your policies. And Democrats were more like, look at all this misinformation that's spreading on it. And you can't do that. So the way in which social media companies have hidden behind this and sort of use these algorithms to make money is to say we're a public forum. We're not a news organization. We're not responsible, for the content that's placed on it. If you start regulating them as being responsible for what they put on there, now their financial incentives look different, because if they fall afoul of that and sort of post things, they're liable for civil suits. And so this is a huge question. And it would require either a regulatory change in how Section 230 is being applied, or a legislative change to clarify how we're going to be treating these platforms. But you can change the incentives just like that by determining what their liability is for the content on their site.
We are going to, I'm sorry. Yeah, so we're 7, 8, 9, 10. We have literally 5 minutes before we have to break. As succinctly as you can. It was number 7.
When it comes to climate change related models or regulations, to what extent is or will AI be involved? And if AI is or will be involved in those models, would lawmakers and policymakers take them seriously, or what would be the reaction?
Okay, next.
All right, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the FCC, from what I read, does not have any jurisdiction over internet, although it does for broadcast and for cable. And since every news organization is sending you to the internet for more information, if that is currently the case with the FCC, I don't understand why that has not been changed.
That's not you guys answering the business. This is hard.
Well, I just got a tip sheet from my wife, who's a chemical engineer, so she knows about the White House climate assessment. They do indeed use AI in their climate models. They're all checked by humans, and that's part of their procedures, sort of going off of Representative Blue said. How policymakers respond to this? My thought is that people in executive agencies, I think they might look into this and sort of consider it. Legislators, sorry, Steve, they're not going to care. The issue is so polarized, like, whether you're a D or an R, like that's what matters. And you're not going to care who made it, if it was a cat or something else. But the FCC, I should check into that, I'm sorry. But the FCC rules were on net neutrality. So I think they've definitely expanded. No, to what extent they can, be involved in some of these, I'm not sure. But
just check this.
So-called edge providers are not under the jurisdiction of the FCC, and which is very bizarre because the edge providers, let's say Amazon, Google, Facebook, and so on, they're providing services that the telecom industry used to provide, except they've squeezed themselves out of jurisdiction by the FCC, but they're under the FTC. It's a bizarre thing. Probably needs to be remediated, but probably not in our lifetimes. So, yeah. Analyses are also checked because, given the hallucinations.
I want to again thank all of you for joining us. Thank you. You will join us for any of the other conversations we're going to be having. And please join us for future programs. Thank you. Another big hand for